I still remember the rain that night. That perfect Seattle rain. Not the downpours that send tourists scurrying for cover, but that gentle mist that makes the city lights blur just enough to feel magical. It was at the annual Pacific Northwest Sustainable Housing Gala, an event I'd normally avoid despite being an architectural project manager. But that night my firm had nominated one of my designs, so there I was, nursing a glass of mediocre champagne, when I first saw Olivia. She stood across the room, examining a scale model of affordable housing units with such intensity that I felt compelled to approach her. Her dark hair was pulled back into a sleek bun, her emerald dress catching the light with every slight movement. "This courtyard design," she said without looking up as I approached, "it creates community without sacrificing privacy." I was impressed. That had been exactly my intention. When she finally looked up at me, her hazel eyes sparked with genuine interest. "I'm Olivia Reed," she said, extending her hand, "the architect's daughter." What she didn't mention was that her father, Walter Reed, was the self-made real estate magnate whose name was on half the commercial buildings in downtown Seattle. I found out later, of course. That night, I just knew she was the most captivating woman I'd ever met. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Olivia had a spontaneity that balanced my methodical nature perfectly. Where I would spend weeks researching the perfect restaurant, she would grab my hand on a Saturday morning and declare we were driving to Portland for the weekend, no reservations necessary. Her impulsiveness terrified and thrilled me. Within a year, I was down on one knee at Cary Park at sunset, the Seattle skyline glittering behind us as I asked her to be my wife. The wedding was small but elegant, just like Olivia wanted. Her father, Walter, watched the ceremony with an unreadable expression. Not quite disapproval, but something close to concern. At our reception, as we shared a moment alone, he shook my hand firmly. "She's always been my hurricane," he said, looking at his daughter across the room. "Beautiful, powerful, and potentially devastating. Take care of her, Ethan. But more importantly, take care of yourself." I laughed it off as typical father of the bride jitters. I should have listened more carefully. The first 2 years of our marriage were everything I dreamed of. We purchased a beautiful craftsman home in Queen Anne, with views of both the Sound and the mountains. The mortgage was solely in my name. Olivia had what she called temporary credit complications, but I didn't mind. She had an eye for interior design that transformed our house into something worthy of a magazine spread. Sometimes I winced at the credit card bills, but watching her face light up as she described her vision for each room made it worth every penny. Walter and I grew closer during those years. He would invite me fishing on Puget Sound, just the two of us in his modest boat that seemed at odds with his considerable wealth. "Money is just a tool, Ethan," he told me once, as we watched our lines disappear into the gray water. "A hammer can build or destroy. It's all in how you use it." He never criticized Olivia directly, but he would ask pointed questions about our finances, about her spending habits. I always defended her. "She's building us a home," I'd say. Walter would just nod, his weathered face betraying nothing. On my 33rd birthday, Walter presented me with a gift, a first edition Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. Inside was a sealed envelope. "This is for later," he said, his eyes serious beneath his bushy eyebrows. "Read it only when you need it most, not before." I thanked him, tucked the envelope inside the book, and placed it on my office shelf, not realizing how prophetic that moment would become. Everything changed the spring Walter was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave him 6 months, maybe a year with aggressive treatment. I immediately stepped up, driving him to his weekly chemotherapy appointments, sitting with him through the nausea and fatigue. Olivia was always busy, with charity functions, with her nascent lifestyle blog, with shopping for things we didn't need. "I can't see him like that," she would say when I pressed her. "I want to remember Daddy as he was." Her spending increased as her father declined. Our bank account dwindled while our home filled with designer clothes, expensive art, and furniture we didn't need. When I raised concerns about our finances, she'd dismiss them with a wave of her manicured hand. "We'll be fine," she'd say. "Trust me." Then came the text messages. I wasn't snooping. Not really. Olivia had left her tablet on our kitchen counter one morning as I was making coffee. A notification flashed across the screen. A text from someone saved as MV asking about a meeting at the Four Seasons that afternoon. Then another. Transferred the money. Delete these texts. My stomach clenched. I told myself it was probably innocent, maybe a client for her blog, perhaps a surprise she was planning. But the seed of doubt had been planted. 2 weeks later, Olivia hosted a dinner party for my colleagues. As I was mixing drinks, she swept into our living room with a tall Latin American man in tow. "Ethan, have you met Marcus Vega, my investment advisor?" His smile didn't reach his eyes as he shook my hand. "Your wife has quite the financial acumen," he said, his accent light but noticeable. "She's going to make you both very wealthy." I nodded, trying to ignore the way his hand lingered on the small of Olivia's back. M.V. Marcus Vega. The pieces started falling into place. Later that week, I found bank statements for an account I didn't know existed. Regular transfers of substantial sums, all coinciding with Olivia's spa days. Have you ever felt that moment when your world tilts on its axis? When you realize that everything you believed was built on quicksand? If you have, drop a comment below. I'd love to know I wasn't alone in that feeling of free fall, that moment when your trust shatters and you're left holding the pieces. While my marriage was crumbling silently, Walter's health deteriorated rapidly. By summer, he was confined to his bed in his downtown penthouse. I visited him daily, reading to him when he was too tired to talk. Olivia came once a week, always perfectly coiffed, always leaving early. "Don't be too hard on her," Walter said one afternoon, his voice barely above a whisper. "She is who she is." The day before he died, Walter grabbed my hand with surprising strength. His blue eyes, sunken now in his gaunt face, fixed on mine with fierce clarity. "The truth will set you free, son," he whispered. "Remember that?" I nodded, tears in my eyes. The next morning, the hospice nurse called to tell me he was gone. Olivia didn't cry at the funeral. She stood stoic in an impeccable black suit, accepting condolences with gracious nods. Marcus Vega was there too, standing at the back of the church, his dark eyes watching Olivia like a hawk. Walter was buried next to his wife in a quiet ceremony at Lakeview Cemetery overlooking the city he had helped build. 1 week later, I returned home from work early, thinking to surprise Olivia with dinner reservations at her favorite restaurant. Maybe we could reconnect, start healing whatever was broken between us. Instead, I found her in our living room, dressed in black satin, a glass of red wine in one hand. Divorce papers lay neatly on our coffee table. "I don't need you anymore, Ethan," she said, her voice as cold as the rain lashing against our windows. "From now on, my life will be different." I stood frozen, the floor seeming to shift beneath me. "Why?" was all I could manage. She laughed, a sound without humor. "Because I deserve more than this." She gestured around our beautiful home as if it were a prison. "More than you." I signed the papers in a state of shock. Not anger, not desperation, but a strange, floating calm. In that moment, I realized a part of me had known this was coming for months, perhaps years. I packed an overnight bag and checked into a hotel downtown. When I returned the next day to collect more of my belongings, the locks had been changed. Through the front window, I could see Marcus Vega lounging on my sofa, drinking from my whiskey collection. Standing in the rain outside what had been my home, I suddenly remembered Walter's book. The note he'd given me, "Read it only when you need it most. If not now, when?" I called his attorney, Eleanor Blackwood, and explained my situation. There was a long pause on the line. "Come to my office immediately," she said, her voice tight with what sounded like suppressed excitement. Walter left specific instructions for after certain events occurred. He anticipated everything. Before I could leave for her office, the hotel concierge called to inform me of a delivery, a package from La Pearl, Seattle's most exclusive lingerie boutique. Inside were 3 sets of lingerie in sizes that weren't Olivia's, charged to my credit card. The message card read simply, "Can't wait for tonight." Oh, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the lingerie box open beside me, and finally let the tears come. Eleanor Blackwood's office was in a historic building on Pioneer Square, all exposed brick and timber beams. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, with silver hair cut in a severe bob. When I entered, she was waiting with Walter's book, my book, in her hands. "He left this with me for safekeeping," she said. "Apparently he was concerned it might disappear from your home." She handed me the book. The envelope was still inside, sealed. "Open it," she encouraged. Walter's handwriting was shaky but legible. "Ethan," the note began, "if you're reading this, Olivia has shown her true colors. I love my daughter, but I've watched her destroy every good thing in her life in pursuit of money and status. I hoped marriage to you would change her. I was wrong, and for that, I apologize. But I'm not just a sentimental old man. I'm a businessman who believes in consequences. Eleanor will explain the rest. Just know that I saw in you the son I never had. The son I wish I had raised instead of the daughter I failed to guide properly. Forgive me." "Walter," I looked up at Eleanor, my hands trembling. "What does this mean?" She smiled for the first time. "It means, Mr. Mitchell, that Walter has left you 20% of his estate. Outright, no conditions." I blinked. "Walter was worth approximately $280 million. Eleanor finished for me. "Your share is $56 million, give or take." The room seemed to spin. "But Olivia will inherit the remaining 80%, Eleanor continued, "but only if she meets certain conditions over the next 5 years. She must maintain full-time employment, not self-employment, not as an influencer, real employment with a paycheck, and complete a series of financial management courses. Failure to meet these conditions will result in her portion reverting to Walter's educational foundation." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "She divorced me thinking she was about to inherit everything," I murmured. "And she has no idea about the conditions." Eleanor's smile turned grim. "As I said, Walter anticipated everything. What would you do if you suddenly received an unexpected inheritance? Would you spend it lavishly or invest it wisely? Let me know in the comments, because I'm still not sure I made all the right choices. If this story resonates with you so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear how this all turns out." I left Eleanor's office in a daze, rain soaking through my jacket as I walked aimlessly through downtown. $56 million. The amount was incomprehensible. I wasn't vindictive by nature, but I couldn't deny the twisted satisfaction I felt, knowing that Olivia had miscalculated so spectacularly. Still, something didn't add up. I needed to understand exactly what had been happening behind my back. I hired Deanna Chen, a private investigator recommended by Eleanor. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who listened to my story without judgment. "I'll find out everything," she promised. And she did, with brutal efficiency. Within 2 weeks, she'd compiled irrefutable evidence. Olivia's affair with Marcus had been going on for 3 years. He wasn't an investment advisor, but a known financial fraudster who had operated under several aliases. They had been systematically siphoning money from our joint accounts. Most damning of all, Diana found emails between them discussing their plans after Walter's death, how they would use Olivia's inheritance to start a new life together. The betrayal cut deep, but the clarity was worth the pain. Meanwhile, Olivia had stormed Eleanor's office, demanding immediate liquidation of, quote, her inheritance. The security footage Diana obtained showed her face contorting in rage as Eleanor calmly explained the conditions of the will. "This is ridiculous," she screamed. "He can't do this to me. I'm his daughter." But Walter had done it, with careful legal precision that not even the best attorneys could unravel. In the aftermath, I watched from a distance as Olivia's life began to unravel. She failed 3 job interviews in 2 weeks. Her resume was sparse, her skills limited to shopping and social climbing. The financial management courses proved equally challenging. She'd never balanced a checkbook in her life. And then the final blow. Marcus disappeared to the Cayman Islands with $110,000 of Olivia's money, all she could scrape together from selling her designer wardrobe. Diana delivered this news with a rare smile. "Karma," she said simply. For my part, I moved carefully. I purchased a modest apartment in Ballard, furnished it simply, and started a consulting business focusing on sustainable architectural design. I didn't touch most of the inheritance, following Eleanor's advice to let the dust settle before making any major decisions. "Money doesn't change who you are," she told me, echoing Walter's wisdom. "It just amplifies it." 6 months after Walter's death, I saw Olivia again. She was leaving a temp agency in downtown Seattle, dressed in clothes I didn't recognize. Simple, unbranded, a far cry from her former designer wardrobe. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Our eyes met across the street, and for a moment I thought she might approach me. Instead, she turned quickly away, shoulders hunched against the persistent drizzle. That evening, I joined a hiking group, part of my effort to rebuild my life one healthy choice at a time. We met at Discovery Park, a diverse group of professionals seeking connection and fresh air. Among them was Natalie Parker, a sustainable architecture professor at the university. She had practical boots, no makeup, and a laugh that made everyone around her smile. We ended up walking together, talking about regenerative design principles and the challenges of teaching Gen Z students. Not once did she ask what I did for a living or where I lived. She just wanted to know what I thought, what I valued. It was refreshing. As the months passed, Olivia made increasingly desperate attempts to fulfill her father's conditions. She took a job at a high-end department store, but was fired after a month for poor performance. She enrolled in financial courses but failed to complete them. She even filed a lawsuit against me, claiming I had exerted undue influence over Walter. The judge dismissed it and ordered her to pay legal fees she couldn't afford. Meanwhile, my relationship with Natalie deepened. We hiked together every weekend, exploring the wilderness areas around Seattle. I told her my story gradually, in pieces, as I processed it myself. She listened without judgment, offering perspective without platitudes. With my inheritance, I established the Reed Sustainable Housing Initiative, focusing on environmentally responsible affordable housing, a tribute to Walter's legacy. I didn't need the money, but I needed the purpose. On the 5-year anniversary of Walter's death, I attended the annual ceremony for his educational foundation. The organization had grown, now offering scholarships to hundreds of students pursuing careers in sustainable development. As I stood at the reception afterward, I spotted a figure watching through the windows from the street outside. Olivia, unrecognizable in plain clothes, no makeup, no jewelry. Our eyes met, and this time there was no anger in her gaze, just a profound emptiness. She turned and disappeared into the rain-slicked streets. That night, I took Natalie to see the cabin I had rebuilt on Whidbey Island, my parents' old summer place that I had repurchased and renovated myself. As we sat by the fireplace, I showed her 2 letters. Walter's note that had changed my life, and a letter Olivia had sent me the week before, begging for financial help. "What will you do?" Natalie asked, her face golden in the firelight. I tossed both letters into the flames and watched them curl and blacken. "Nothing," I said. Forgiveness isn't about opening doors. It's about not letting someone stand behind you anymore. Outside, the sound stretched dark and limitless before us, the Seattle skyline a distant constellation on the horizon. The rain had finally stopped. If there's something you've taken from my story, something that resonated with you, I'd really appreciate hearing about it in the comments. And if you know someone who might need to hear that they can rebuild after betrayal, please share this video with them. Sometimes the stories of others can be the map we need to find our own way forward. Trust me when I say that even in your darkest moments, there's light waiting on the other side. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories of survival and redemption, because while my journey might be unique, the human capacity to heal and grow is something we all share.